x-intercepts of a line is a point where the line crosses the x-axis. Y-intercept of a line is the point where the line crosses the y-axis. Finding x or y values from a graph implies reading the x or y-axis. So in many cases we can assume it's very straightforward. Once again, assumption. Okay, so let's say you have a rough sketch. Let's do a quick rough sketch. There it is. You're welcome to do it by hand. In this case, I've made it in a quick pasted graph or background graph. So in this case here we have our line intersecting the x and y axis. Well, do remember which ones are x-axis, which ones are y-axis. X-axis is the horizontal one. I recommend you label it. And the vertical one is the y-axis, agreed? So in other words, we have a dot there and the x-axis where x is 6. And we can make a dot. Keep in mind that's our y-intercept before we make a dot. Y-intercept. And one thing I would definitely like for you to remember, if at worst case scenario, memorize. This is one of the few things I'd like for you to memorize. Everything else you'll get the practice and memorize by practicing. But this one, if you memorize from now on, it'll be easier for you in many other cases where you see it. And you do see it quite often. The x-intercept. Whenever you're wondering about the x-intercept, you should automatically know that the y value is 0. So no matter where your x-intercept is, your y value is always 0. Highly recommend you memorize that. For the x-intercept, your y value is 0. And in this case, our x value, once again, we said is 6. So there it is, our x-intercept, 6, 0. And now let's depict our y-intercept. So y-intercept on our y-axis, there's the dot. And it's roughly at 5, right? Keep in mind, if it was somewhere in between, you'd take a rough estimate. Let's say if it was at 2.5 or 2.5 roughly, you say 2.5. Somewhere between there, 2.3. And it's your best guess in many cases. That's totally fine. If it's not exactly the same as maybe you're comparing it to your book examples, well, that's totally okay. You're giving your best approximation. Do keep that in mind. So back to our y-intercept. So there is our y-intercept. So let's label it as y-intercept for reference. And do remember, in this case, it's the opposite of the x-intercept. So this is the other thing I'd like for you to memorize. It'll make your life so much easier in the future. If you're looking for the y-intercept, the x value is always 0. So for the y-intercept, x is always 0. So it doesn't matter where it crosses your y-axis, your x value is always 0. And then for this particular case, the y-intercept or the y value is 5. So once again, if you're looking for the x-intercept, the y value is always 0. Looking for the y-intercept, the x value is always 0. Something to keep in mind, okay? Or preferably memorize.